Good morning, everyone joining us, and welcome to the first day and the opening keynote session of the Reimagining Climate Adaptation Summit, co-hosted by Future Earth Australia, the Sydney Environment Institute at the University of Sydney, and the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University. My name is David Schlosberg, and I'm the director of the Sydney Environment Institute and one of the coordinators of this summit. To begin, and crucial especially given the focus of this first day of the summit, I want to introduce Yvonne Weldon, chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, to offer a welcome to country. Yvonne.
Thank you, David. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers. As was said, my name is Yvonne Weldon. I am a sovereign Wiradjuri woman. I come from Cowra, here in New South Wales. I am the elected chairperson of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, by the Culture Authority under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, for the land that I am on. I would like to pay my respects to all elders past and present, to all First Nations, to you and the ancestors' lands that you are all on today. Welcome to country is an age-old tradition. It is more than just words, it is a spiritual process for honouring the ancestors' footsteps we are walking in, continuing the practice of the generations before us to the many generations to come. The boundaries of our traditional owners are written into the earth's natural landscapes. The boundaries of the Eora are the Hawkes River in the north, the Nepean in the west, and the Georges River in the south. On behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders, and the members, I welcome everyone to the land of the Gadigal. I acknowledge the Gadigal people and the people of the lands that you are on, whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with these lands, our Mother Earth. Across this beautiful continent, there are hundreds of nations, tribes and clans existing here for over 60,000 years. This country's First Nations people are the oldest living culture of the world. And as we're all joined online, let us all remember and acknowledge the many warriors that created pathways for all of us, and the ones recognised and the ones we've never heard of. My people have always listened and learned from each other, the environment, animals, elements, and our ancestors. We don't live in isolation of body, culture, spirit, land and water, because we are one, for in our blood it runs. We need to reflect upon our footsteps we're leaving to know where we're heading, shaping a society, our country we can be proud of. And in these times of this pandemic, don't let the social distance make us socially absent. We must maintain physical distancing, but not creating barriers to our social connections. We need to be connected even more so today, now than ever. So whether it's through your work or your networks, creating an inclusion, an acceptance and a resilience. All of us together can bring about positive changes to multiple generations, starting a healing to the past generations by declaring what should not have taken place, to the present day generations, giving them hope, and creating a future for the next generations, for everyone in this country. We are in this together, and we can achieve positive change each and every day, bringing my people, your people, and our people together. As you consider and listen to the views being presented today on climate adaptation and reducing our negative impact on the only world we have, remember to reflect about my people's lived experience and our connection to the land. That was forever changed when we were erased from the view. My people have lived in unison with this country for thousands of generations, learned from our ancient practices because we are still here. Think about what difference you can make today that will become the milestones of the future, all our futures. So let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, welcome to Gadigal land. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Yvonne, for that welcome, that beautiful welcome, and for starting us out with that reminder, that insistence that we remember place and relationships and the knowledges and peoples who are bound to this place as we think about the impacts of climate change and about adaptation to those impacts. I also want to acknowledge that I live and work on unceded Gadigal land, and acknowledge that the environment in this place and the relationships across human and non-human here have been absolutely devastated in the time since colonization. And those impacts are increasing due to climate change. In opening this summit, I want to lay out a bit of the collaboration that has led to this conference, as well as the themes of each day. And then we'll have a couple of other brief introductions, one from the Chief Executive of the Science Academy, and then our own Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research. And then we'll turn to our opening keynote from Bruce Pascoe. As we know, Australia currently has no substantive national mitigation policy, no energy transition policy, no forward thinking about transition to a more sustainable economy, and no adaptation policy. There's absolutely no national response equal to the task of our new normal state of climate emergency. In the midst of the bushfires at the start of 2020, the Prime Minister suggested that Australia needed to address issues of climate resilience and adaptation. In this, there was no acknowledgement that the government had closed the CSIRO climate adaptation flagship in 2014. They ignored the National Climate Resilience and Adaptation Strategy in 2015. They defunded the National Climate Change Adaptation Research Facility, NCARF, in 2017. And they ignored the National Disaster Reduction Framework in 2018. And while the PM promised a focus on adaptation, and while there were 80 recommendations by the Royal Commission into the bushfires last year, little has been done. And instead, we have a so-called gas-led recovery proposed by the government and the fossil fuel lobby that would obviously make our multiple crises worse. Now, after the fires, colleagues and affiliates of Future Earth Australia, many of whom had been involved in the CSIRO flagship and/or NCARF, came together to discuss a way forward for adaptation research in Australia. And then COVID hit. So with the help of the Academy of Science, we started a national consultation in mid-2020 with 4 virtual gatherings across the states and territories. These included researchers, policymakers and administrators, NGOs, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives, and other community members. We began with the premise that adaptation and resilience must be framed with respect to enabling a just transition for all Australians. And we asked these, what the strengths and weaknesses gap references into adaptation planning. The summary of those consultations and the initial synthesis of the findings are available on the Future Earth Australia website. And we've used the 5 key issues raised to organize and curate this summit on reimagining adaptation. So those core issues are these. First is integrating First Nations knowledge and worldviews and figuring out how to validly integrate traditional and grounded knowledges with Western science in ways that are both equitable and value-adding. And that's really the focus of this first day of the summit. There was a call to reframe economic approaches to better suit the needs of adaptation, incorporating the benefits of longer-term planning decisions in an economic paradigm that's driven by short-term outcomes, and a discounting of the future. We'll address that on day 2. There's a call to coordinate across levels of government, from national to state to local, as well as organizations in the private and community sectors. And we'll address that issue both on days 2 and 3. There was a call to achieve integrated place-based action that integrates across sectoral and disciplinary silos, that addresses multiple knowledges, local relevance, and appropriate resources. This is about taking an integrated systems approach without being paralyzed by complexity. And we'll start dealing with this question today, but it's really the main focus of day 3. Transformative, creative adaptation will take a lot of work, and it's time to take that seriously, comprehensively, and realistically, rather than simply making an announcement and then turning your back. And so that's what this is all about, and we look forward to the conversations over the next 3 days. But before moving on, I do want to thank all of those who've done the hard work of pulling this virtual event together. There was a large steering group, but I want to give particular thanks to Tayona O'Donnell, Director of Future Earth Australia, Eleanor Robeson, also at Future Earth, Juan Salazar at Western Sydney and his team, and of course the team here at the Sydney Environment Institute, in particular Genevieve Wright, for all of the organizing. The Sydney Environment Institute is proud to be co-hosting this event as a multidisciplinary institute dedicated to both analysis of and transformations out of a set of environmental crises. The intersection of environmental and climate justice on the one hand and adaptational resilience on the other have been absolutely central to our mission. Now, of course, one of the other institutions central to this work has been the Australian Academy of Science, and it's now my great pleasure to introduce Anna Maria Arabia, the Chief Executive of the Academy, to say a few words of welcome as well.
Thank you ever so much, David, for that very warm welcome. And could I also thank Yvonne for your wonderful welcome to country. I'm joining you from Ngunnawal land, and it's so great that so many people have been able to attend this virtual national Reimagining Adaptation Summit. And as David said, we don't have a moment to lose. So your efforts and your energy over the coming days and your contribution to date are deeply, deeply appreciated. This summit's an absolute wonderful example of the Future Earth Australia network and its partnerships. The Australian Academy of Science is very proud to host Future Earth Australia, and it's delighted to see such a wonderfully diverse array of experts who over the next few days will be sharing their knowledge and perspectives with you here in the virtual room. The Australian Academy of Science, of course, has a very long tradition of upholding the values of scientific excellence. Aligned with this are our ongoing efforts to ensure the science sector and all of its work is well supported and resourced to enable discovery and to enable excellence. Following the devastation of the 2019-2020 summer bushfires and the overwhelming loss and damage arising from them, it's critical that Australia has leadership and investment in resilience and adaptation. So it's fitting that we as a community gather to discuss what this resilience and adaptation looks like, what it should be. There is great urgency in not only sharing our knowledge, but also in investing in the pathways for enabling equitable adaptation for the benefits of all. Over the next 3 days, we'll start to chart a course of enablement, one which we hope inspires leadership and investment from all sectors for the security of a just and equitable future for everyone. With the leadership of the Future Earth Australia Secretariat and its members, this event is a wonderful demonstration of partnership. To that end, we're delighted to have partnered with the University of Sydney and the Sydney Environmental Institute and the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University. The Academy and Future Earth Australia thanks them for their demonstrated leadership in this area in partnering with us to deliver this important event. I also wish to thank all of you who are participating today for your participation. None of this is possible if we work alone, so coming together is truly important. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank 3M for their support for Future Earth Australia's Empowering Future Leaders in Adaptation workshop, which is being held on Thursday. So I wish you every success in your deliberations. I will participate to the extent that I'm able over the next few days, and I very much look forward to learning of the outcomes of the summit. Now I wish to hand over to Professor Duncan Ivison, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research at the University of Sydney. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna Marie. Good morning, everyone. Morning, David and Bruce. And let me just begin by thanking Yvonne for her wonderful welcome to country. I have the privilege of doing many events with Yvonne, and I'm never not moved by the welcome to countries that she provides, and also challenged by them as well. So it's wonderful to have Yvonne's welcome to country. And let me acknowledge I'm coming to you from Gadigal country here on the Camperdown campus of the University of Sydney. You know, we call ourselves Australia's first university, but obviously there's been research and teaching going on in this place for more than 60,000 years. So the first university predates us by about 59,850 years. So it's a privilege to be with you this morning. And I have to say it's a complete privilege and honor to be introducing this morning's keynote speaker in Bruce Pascoe. We have an Indigenous research strategy here at the University of Sydney, which my colleague, Professor Jacqueline Troy, leads. And the title of that strategy is Garungun, which means roughly to think and listen together. And I think the next few days will involve us thinking and listening together to deal with these incredibly important issues. The frame for which David set up on the one hand, concisely, on the other hand, rather depressingly this morning, but hopefully this is also a couple of days of building hope and agency in addressing those issues. As I said, it's a particular privilege and pleasure to be introducing Bruce Pascoe. I don't think many of us online today haven't had the chance to either read Bruce's important work, and especially Dark Emu, but to be shaped in some way by his contributions over the last few years, which have been really an extraordinary contribution, not just to the public debate in Australia, but to our understanding and our knowledge of Aboriginal agriculture, among many, many things. Bruce is a Yuin and Bunurong man and Tasmanian man, and as we know, he's published widely across both adult and young adult literature. He's now in the university sector, which is wonderful to see, having joined the University of Melbourne as an Enterprise Professor in Indigenous agriculture in the Faculty of Vet and Agricultural Science. Obviously, I mentioned his probably best known work, Dark Emu, Black Seeds, Agriculture or Accident, which was a really profound interrogation of the assumptions lying behind many of our, I think, rather superficial beliefs about Aboriginal people and their engagement with agriculture and their engagement with land and their world system and world knowledges around the lands upon which they've been resident for so long. And I think that book was a profound challenge to a whole set of colonial mindsets that still, I think, dominate so much, unfortunately, of our world today. Dark Emu won numerous awards, including the Children's Book Council of Australia, Eve Pownell Award, and the New South Wales Premier's Book of the Year Award in 2016. And in 2018, as you know, Bruce was awarded the Australia Council Award for Lifetime Achievement in Literature. Bruce lives on a farm in East Gippsland, and which is home to his most recent project, Black Duck Foods. This is a wonderful social enterprise committed to traditional food growing processes that care for country on the one hand and return an economic benefit directly to Indigenous people. And I have to say, in a very practical way, Bruce's work has inspired us at the University of Sydney. We have a wonderful campus in northern New South Wales, in Narrabri, and there we have an Indigenous Grasslands for Grain project underway, working with local Aboriginal communities and our agricultural scientists to bring the local native grain production system back into the mainstream and to develop opportunities for those communities to benefit from that. Some of you might have seen our installation on Grasses to Grains last year on campus, and that's something we're looking forward to bringing back to you hopefully later on this year. It's a kind of act of food sovereignty, and Bruce's work has been an inspiration to the researchers and the colleagues in bringing that project to fruition. So without really any further ado, no more words from me. I'm delighted to welcome Bruce, you to this wonderful conference and to invite you to deliver the keynote lecture. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the welcome. I'm a Yuin Bunurong, Tasmanian man, and I'm on the Bungalow country, South Australia at the moment. And it's very inspiring to start talking about these things in the country. And I don't think we should be too surprised that it's universities who are initiating these conversations. If we were expecting our politicians to do so, I think we'd be going against the natural order. If our professional thinkers aren't going to initiate this conversation, then nobody is going to. And we need to stay focused and patient and persistent in the pursuit of these ideas in order for them to cross over into the political arena. I believe that, like many people in the world, that the planet is in is in serious trouble environmentally, and most of that trouble has been caused by us. And that's why I like to concentrate on the length of time that Aboriginal people have been here. And towards that end, I refer to Jim Bowler's excavation at Warrnambool in Victoria, which came up with a date of 120,000 years of Aboriginal people working on one of the southernmost points of Australia. Of course, our people say we've always been here, and that's a conversation I think our country can usefully have in the future. But let's just say for the time being that it's 120,000 years. And a lot of archaeologists and anthropologists and politicians argue, and of course journalists, argue with me that this is an exaggeration, that I'm gilding the Aboriginal lily. But when I first went to school, which was quite a long time ago, so I have a reasonable range of reference, I was told that Aboriginal people had been in Australia for 5,000 years. And by the time I had finished that particular school on King Island, it was 10,000 years. By the time I crossed the strait, went back to Mornington and got to high school, it was 20,000 years thanks to Cow Swamp. And by the time I finished high school, it was 40,000 years thanks to carbon dating. By the time I got to university, people were starting to think that it could have been older. You know, I don't know why they would possibly think that, given that the carbon dating technique can only measure 40,000 years, but perhaps there was an insight there somewhere. Last year, of course, we were told that a cave in the Northern Territory had shown that people had been living there 65,000 years ago. We can't expect our politicians to start using dates like that, but the trajectory of this investigation of Australia is showing us that we've got a lot of science starting to back up a really old age for Aboriginal people in this country. And that is interesting to this week of learning at Sydney Uni, because it takes in periods of climate change, periods of desertification, glaciation, and what it tells us is that Aboriginal people survived those. They survived those changes, and they survived with their language intact. And that is indicative of Aboriginal people staying exactly where they were. There were certainly movements. People living in Bass Strait had to move to either the north or south as sea levels rose. But we have story and law for that. It's a fascinating story and has yet to be engaged by the academic community, I think, because we are searching for the language of Bass Strait. We believe that we can trace that language amongst the peoples who had to leave Bass Strait. And we have the story that the whale told us how to leave Bass Strait, and but we took our languages with us. So those languages merged with other languages. And for us, that's hugely important because it's an indication of diplomacy. And that diplomacy should be manna for the world. For people to leave one country and enter the country of their cousins without warfare and with their language intact is an indication that the human can cooperate. It is not absolutely necessary for us to go to war. we ought to be able to conduct ourselves in such a way that we meet adversity, such as climate change, and can do so without another group losing. Now, in our adversarial system that we have, our adversarial political system, our adversarial economic system, our adversarial social media system, we presume that we have to fight each other. And I think that Aboriginal life is telling us that's not the case. We can cooperate. The human has proven that she can cooperate with other humans. And I should have said he, because in the past it has often been he who has either chosen war or peace. And the evidence of Aboriginal people having chosen peace, evidenced by the fact they're still here, and languages are unchanged in most of the corners of the country. And I mentioned Bass Strait because that's a really unusual circumstance, as is the top northwest corner of Australia, where there was massive land loss. So there must have been massive human drift inward toward the interior. These are disturbances which Aboriginal people survived, and survived with languages and cultures intact. And the reason I emphasise it is because I think it shows us that we can do this. But we can't do it without our contemporary political and economic systems changing. I believe that we can meet the challenge of climate change by doing a few very simple things. One of them would be to stop ploughing the land and growing perennial crops which will sequester carbon and will hold soil. Now, one of our contributions to climate change is our abuse of soil. This, the idea that you can continue to plough the light soils of Australia, release carbon into the atmosphere every time you do it, but also release your soil into the atmosphere. And 2 summers ago, just before the big fires, we ploughed the land around Brewarrina and half of New South Wales in order to produce cotton, a very, very thirsty crop. And in the process of that, our soil went into the air and ended up in New Zealand. This process, as a farmer, as a Minister for Agriculture, ought to be anathema. We shouldn't allow this to happen. The fact that we continue to allow it to happen means that we don't understand this country. That is why I want us to start thinking about how did Aboriginal Australia organise itself as a political system so that abuse of this kind could not be tolerated. Aboriginal people believe that the earth is our mother. Now, the British system of politics, that adversarial system I mentioned before, and the economic system, which is profit at all costs, means that we act in ways which indicate to someone who would be examining us from out of space, looking down upon us, saying these people despise their grandchildren because they don't care what the planet looks like in another generation's time. So they must despise their grandchildren because they don't care what they do to the country, as long as they make a profit, as long as they get a huge and ugly house, as long as they get a huge and ugly car, everything will be okay. And I think we can do better than that. And I think Aboriginal Australia has shown people, that humans can operate in a better way. So if we made one little change, like concentrating more on perennials. Now I'm in Port Lincoln at the moment on Bungalow country, and this is a big wheat area. There are silos everywhere. And to plant wheat, you need to plough. But some farmers here are now direct seeding other crops into the stubble. So the land's not being ploughed. They're direct seeding into the stubble. So carbon is not being released at the same rate as it was before. A simple little innovation like that can make a huge difference. So I'm advocating for a change in agricultural method in the country, but I think we also need perhaps an even more profound change than that. Because if we were to use perennial Australian grains and perennial Australian tubers and grow them over the range of country and distance that Aboriginal people used, we would be crossing areas of private ownership. And that becomes very difficult, because the other thing I'm suggesting is that we eat kangaroos instead of cattle and sheep. Sheep are incredibly destructive of soil. I personally bought a lamb roast the other day, and because I know how to cook it, and I've got sage and herbs in the garden, which I know will have the effect on lamb of making it beautiful. But I also eat kangaroo. And people argue against the use of kangaroo, saying kangaroos are beautiful. They certainly are, a very soulful creature. The sight of a female kangaroo nurturing its young, both of them asleep in the sun in my front yard, really warms the heart. And it doesn't disturb me to think that at some stage I will shoot a young male kangaroo illegally in order to get meat, because the young kangaroo is only as beautiful as a young lamb, no more beautiful. They're still animals. And I have no compunction in killing a kangaroo because it is exactly the same as killing a lamb. But the kangaroo is better for our country. And those soft-footed animals are so much better for our soil. If we're going to kill kangaroos over wide areas, once again, the fence becomes irrelevant, because the kangaroo can bounce. It cannot be constrained within fences. So it's asking us, this change in method is not asking us to become communists. What it is asking us to do is to cooperate. Now, if we can think of accounting systems that will allow us, say, to bank in the Bahamas, and for that to be legal, and for that to protect our economic system, or some people's economic system, then we ought to be able to shoot kangaroos over a very wide range of country, and for the dividend from the sale of that kangaroo to be shared equitably amongst the relevant farmers of private ownership. The only thing different would be that the fence is gone and that we manage the land in a different way. So I don't see that sharing country, sharing the dividend of country is a descent into communism. I see it as an advance into cooperation. And our accounting systems can handle it. Our farmers have shown that they can pull down fences, because when those big tractors were invented that were driven by global positioning systems, the only efficient way to use them was to drive them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And to do that, you pull down the fences and you drive in straight lines until you reach the end of that section of land, which might be having already crossed a state border, as it did in Victoria and South Australia. And then you turn it 90 degrees and you keep on going for another 3 or 4 days, and then you turn around again. Now, this was a way for farmers to harvest over huge areas. They then divided the dividend amongst them. So we can do these things. We shouldn't allow some of our right-wing politicians to say all of this stuff is communism and socialism. It's not, it's cooperation. And it's there because we don't despise our grandchildren. We want a future for our grandchildren. So we sensibly start looking at those things that will allow us to continue as a species. In the book Sapiens, we're told there that if sapiens last another 1,000 years, it will be almost a miracle. That's a shocking thing to anticipate for our ancestors, our descendants rather. And so can we reverse that? Can this animal, which is us, the sapien, can we continue? Or do we allow our own grumpy nature to undermine our very existence? I think it's worthwhile for us to have a go at cooperation, because Aboriginal people have proven that that system is capable of working for the human species. And to look on Aboriginal life with disdain, as Australia has done, or as a charity, as Australia has done, is a really anti-intellectual point of view. And I'm not pretending that Aboriginal people are all good and all wise, but what I'm insisting on is that we look at the longevity of Aboriginal cultural advance and see the stability, cultural stability, political stability, economic stability, and see that that is a good model for the human race. You know, right-wing politicians once again will say, well, Aboriginal people didn't invent the wheel. No, we didn't, because, you know, harnessing the wheel to a kangaroo is going to be terribly unsuccessful. Aboriginal people probably anticipated that. But these inventions of the wheel created so much in Western life, but they also destroyed so much, because the wheel was also hooked up to a cannon. The wheel also launches satellites into space, which are now destroying outer space. So we shouldn't allow people just to dismiss Aboriginal life out of hand because of some comparison with Western life, because Western life is destroying the planet. That's not a success. So we must look around at what humans have done elsewhere. And I can't think of another civilization which managed the human spirit and the problems of geographic and economic and cultural life as successfully as have Australian Aboriginal people. Now, my attachment to Aboriginal life is fine. I'm more Cornish than I am Aboriginal, but the investigation of my own background dragged me into a contemplation of these things. I didn't do it because of my own research brilliance. I did it because I knew nothing about the history of my family. But having done that, what I'm suggesting to Australia is this is a valid academic search, because it offers us the opportunity to study a civilization where those people decided at a very early stage, let's say 120,000 years ago, that everybody would belong to a certain portion of the land. The land wouldn't belong to them. They would belong to that portion of land. So the Yuin people, for instance, on southeastern corner of Australia, would always stay in that country. They would not be warlike. They would not be ambitious because they didn't need to be. The Goodnich Ma in Western Victoria would always stay looking after their land, not looking towards someone else's land, not wishing to expand because their responsibility was to the earth itself, not to themselves. And the earth's responsibility is not to us. Our responsibility is to her. And that shift in intelligence, that shift in outlook is the fundamental to saving ourselves, in my opinion. That's why I'm saying to look at the past, how Aboriginal people managed Australia, is not just a quaint anthropological study, it's a study of necessity. Because nowhere else on earth did people conduct themselves with so little resort to organised violence. We were violent. Aboriginal people were violent, but we were not warlike. And there's a massive distinction there. We were violent because we're human. And this is something that I think humans can investigate. We're currently not investigating it in the Australian Parliament, but we should. We have to think about the relationship between men and women, what it meant in the past, what it might mean in the future. Because I believe that humans are on a trajectory. I don't think we've ever stood still. And in that trajectory about how we might organise ourselves socially and economically and environmentally, which we're going to have to do, we'll also be organising ourselves differently amongst ourselves, and that is between men and women. And that needs to be done because there's a suggestion there of division of labour, and divisions of labour are supposed to be one of the things that distinguishes the civilised human. That's what I was told at university anyway. One of the distinctions of the human is to organise labour, of the civilised human. But see, that doesn't mean that Aboriginal people weren't, because we did divide labour in a civilised way. We divided labour amongst ourselves, but we were also organised sexually in various ways, and I'd like to think that in modern human life, that not only can we be better at looking after the earth, we can be better at looking after each other. I don't think it's beyond us. I don't think it's an irrational wish. I don't think it's beyond the human soul. So when we start reimagining our future, we don't just reimagining how we might use the soil, how we might eat kangaroos, how we might convert from wheat to kangaroo grass or from potatoes to murnong. We also need to contemplate how we treat each other and how we teach our children to treat other children. I think we're capable of it, and I think it will create a different world. We can either choose to create a better world, or we can deliberately choose to create a worse world. And sometimes a worse world might look rosy because economically we benefit, whereas 75% of the rest of the world are disadvantaged by our decision. But I think that our species is capable of enormous cooperation and, dare I say it, love.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bruce. And that really is an amazing and perfect introduction to the next few hours today, but to the conference as a whole. This idea of acknowledging and learning from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges and other Indigenous knowledges across Oceania is the theme for today, and it really is the first focus of this whole summit. This idea, this reality that there are historical examples of living through climate change, of moving, of cooperating, of understanding that sort of ecological change, that those storylines still exist here, and that they can be tapped into, they can be learned from. That's absolutely crucial to what we're going to be talking about today. And it's not just the historical, it's the contemporary as well. The way those knowledges are designing better ways of living with each other, with the environment, is also absolutely crucial. So the work on the perennial grains that you and your teams are doing is central to using existing knowledges, different knowledges, cooperating across different kinds of knowledge systems, Indigenous knowledge systems and contemporary economic systems, for example, in order to think about creative ways forward, creative ways to change, creative ways to adapt, creative ways to cooperatively save ourselves. So I think we'll close this session now. We'll take a bit of a break, and the first or the next session begins at 11 a.m. straight up, and that is specifically a session on knowledge systems across Australia's First Nations people, chaired by Melissa Haswell. And so a number of the themes from Bruce's talk will clearly be revisited, not just in that session, but throughout the day today. So again, I want to thank Bruce Pascoe for that beautiful keynote and introduction to the conference. I want to thank all of you for attending. I want to encourage all of you who are out there listening to rejoin us at 11 a.m. For the first full session of this conference, where we'll continue these themes. So in that spirit of cooperation and that spirit of learning from one another, again, a thank you to Bruce and a thank you to all of you, and we'll see you at 11 a.m. Thanks very much.